of Patriots, and the Calare candidate is Vicky O'Leary. Now, on the way in, members of the audience have written questions for our candidates on these little slips of paper, which are gathered here. There are probably too many for us to get through all of them tonight, but fortunately, almost all of them similar issues, so I think we're going to be okay. Each question will be put to all the candidates, who will have 3 minutes each to address the question. And Dennis, who's sitting here, the timekeeper, when Tinkerbell rings his little bell at the 2.5 minute mark, that's the signal to wind it up, and then it'll go again at 3 minutes when the time for the speaking has passed. 3 minutes might not sound like very much. You can boil an egg in 3 minutes. You can listen to a news bulletin on 2LT for 3 minutes, but our candidates are all experienced pros and they can get a point across in 3 minutes, I feel very sure. To make it sporting, we have not shared the questions with the candidates in advance. But again, I somehow suspect it possibly. So before we start with questions, I'll invite each candidate to give us opening remarks for 4 minutes to highlight what they see as the key issues in this campaign and their pitch for your vote. And we'll start right enough with the city member. Just stand like you were.
Thanks.
Step back, mate. We've got the party ahead of.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming along to this evening's forum. I think these are really useful in the lead up to the election. And I just wanted to thank the Lithgow District Chamber of Commerce for putting it on, and just let you know that I think it's a great thing that you're doing. So well done.
Thank you.
As you've heard, my name is Andrew G, and I have been the federal member here in Calare since 2016. And before that, I was the state member for Orange since 2011. And the reason that I got into politics was because I could see that there were many things that city people had that country people did not. And that ranged from basic services such as radiotherapy. It ranged from services like roads and infrastructure. We had a 24-hour, we had a rescue helicopter which closed at 6 p.m, but city people had plenty of access to rescue helicopters. And so my mission, as I stated in my inaugural speeches to the state and federal parliaments, has been bridging that great divide between city and country. The sandstone curtain, as it's known, very close obviously here, but it's a divide that exists in so many different ways. And my mission as an MP has been to bridge that great divide and make sure that country people get their fair share. And together, I've done a lot of work with the Lithgow communities in various different ways. We've been through the Black Summer bushfires, and I was here in Lithgow on the day that Lithgow basically went up during Black Summer. We went through that together. We went through the COVID together, and through the COVID initiatives and working with the community to get a check-in scheme going, so that we were checking in on community members with our community organisations. And so I've always stood up to make sure that we get our fair share. And I think that we've got a pretty strong track record, I have, of delivering with our communities for the region. And there's quite a list. Most recently, there was $3 million for the Lithgow mountain bike track, $1.5 million to Secret Creek Sanctuary, which we just opened the new visitor centre on the weekend. Together, we went through Lithgow Aged Care and the trauma of the potential closure of that. Folks here will remember how bad that was. And then securing millions of dollars to actually make sure that Respect had enough funding to take over Lithgow Aged Care. $1.84 million for Walgett Valley Community Centre, $2 billion to the Great Western Highway, new generator and kitchen for Lithgow Workies Club, which was the evacuation centre, upgrades to the pavilion at the showground, $500,000 for a bulk water carrier for the RFS at Capertee. We got that with the community. $1.65 million for a community centre at the Zigzag Railway. $2 million for the upgrade of Lithgow's Main Street. We can talk about the plans later. $300,000 for Steamworks at the foundations, 3 MRI scans at Lithgow Hospital, and really the list goes on and on and on. And so together, I think there's a strong track record there of working with our communities. And since 30 seconds, I've also introduced bills to ban the foreign buying of residential property for 2 years, get more doctors working and living in the bush, keeping cash king in Australia, breaking up the market dominance of the supermarket giants, and banning wind farms in state forests. We've got some big issues affecting us. I myself have been a small business person. I've started my own small business. And I think you need someone who is experienced and who has that real life experience of working in small business, knowing what it's like to struggle to pay those bills so that get money through the doors so that you can in turn pay other people. And so I look forward to working with our communities to continue that important work through the challenges ahead, which we will talk about shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Next candidate is April, an independent.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm so pleased that we're being here at the Lithgow Transformation Hub. I think it's really appropriate because transformation is such a huge opportunity for Lithgow in this broader area. I'm also really happy to be here at the invitation of the Chamber of Commerce, and I imagine many of you feel members of business owners. I've been around business my whole life. A commerce degree from the University of New South Wales. I started my own business as a small farmer. I worked in families, which is medical practice, and I worked in a big corporate law firm for 3 years in Sydney, and I was HR manager there. So I understand business. I understand hiring and firing staff, managing staff, but that's often the most difficult part of business. I'm running as a politician and an independent candidate. So I'm not part of the political party. I've never been part of the political party. I've no interest in being part of the political party. The reason I'm running is not because I've had a lifelong ambition to be a politician. I'm running out of a sense of necessity and urgency and responsibility. I realised as a constituent when I would go and see my MP about certain issues that party politics was often the barrier to getting things done instead of being the vehicle to get things done. I would experience that sense of the MP having to toe the party line on certain issues, even when evidence and the best possible advice in Australia were telling me a different story. I also experienced bringing experts to town and the sense from the MP that I'm really by the party, so I don't need that expertise. So it occurred to me this is not a great way to make good decisions. You know, all of you are in business, you wouldn't make decisions in business without good advice and without being able to consider the best expertise. So what I'm really excited about doing in terms of supporting businesses in Lithgow is working on things like having affordable childcare so people can enter the workforce, to have affordable housing to attract the workers that we need to keep them here, to have good education and good health care, viable health care to attract people and keep them here. I'm absolutely so adamant about the need for cheap, reliable energy now, not in 2040. So that means continuing on a renewable pathway that we're on, not waiting for nuclear to come on board sometime perhaps in 2040 at massive expense to our economy. In fact, it will be a record for our economy, and that's hugely economically responsible. I'm so excited about supporting Lithgow to achieve the potential that we know it has. We've all heard the Lithgow Evolving Economic Plan. So much work is going into that, and yet it just needs the support to get it going and to achieve what it can. We know the opportunity with the locomotive workshop coming back into use. And even more exciting with that project is the opportunity of decarbonising trains on a massive scale. There's hundreds and hundreds of jobs that can happen in the near future, not in 2040, as proposed by the nuclear plan. So the basis of all of that is cheap, reliable energy. It's also community involvement. So the way I do politics is community independent. Thank you. The way I do politics as a community independent is different. It's about having the communities who live in a place involved in the decisions that will shape their future. And I'm so excited to do that for you as your MP. Thank you.
Continuing to Caitlin and indeed what Andy was saying, there are a number of questions just thumbing through some of these slips, and as well as some of the questions that people have sent into us via email. Thank you to the chamber members who responded to the request for questions. Oh, time's up. Anyway, many of these issues have both been touched on are in fact included in the questions you may be happy to know. Let's meet our next candidate, Sam Farrell.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out on your Tuesday night and being part of democracy. This is how it works, and it's an important part of meeting candidate forums of any election campaign. I'm Sam Farroway, the national candidate for the City of Clare for the upcoming election. My background is small business, born, raised, educated in Bathurst, so I took over our family business with my dad when I was 18. He fell crook. I went straight in from the HSC straight in to run the family business, which included owning the Hertz franchise here in Lithgow as a family for 30 years. So I know the Lithgow economy quite well. We used to see the highs and lows of coal mining and coal-fired power generation and shutdowns and different industries over that time. I'm just going to be straight up, ladies and gentlemen. I'm running in this election because I feel that our country has a big decision to make, not just for the next 3 years, but for decades to come. The decisions at this election will either set up our country and will have dividends, or we will have a serious issue, I believe, with a hung parliament in the years to come. I think our country needs to spend a few years getting back to basics, whether that's migration numbers, whether that's real and meaningful support for small business, because there hasn't been any for 3 years, whether that is looking at access to a GP, our crumbling road infrastructure, and setting up regions like Lithgow for the future, actually having a plan that underpins this economy, not for the next 3 years, the next decade, but what underpins Lithgow for the whole next generation. Because as I door knock for the last so many months around Lithgow, so many people, whether they're in business, whether they're a pensioner, whether they're a working mum and dad, they say to me, how do we fill the shops? How do we make sure that there are jobs, good paying jobs for a good day, for a hard day's work in Lithgow for decades to come? How do we set Lithgow up so the next generation don't have to move to Sydney? How do we set Lithgow up so you don't have to drive to Bathurst? The economy, local economy is so important and is front and centre and should be front and centre in this campaign. And yes, it will no doubt get touched upon in the questions, but Lithgow has been the engine room of regional New South Wales for decades. And that's partly the decision that people in Lithgow and the Calare electorate need to make at this election is, how do we have a positive plan to set Lithgow up? How does it have an industry that underpins this economy, the community, for decades to come, that other economies locally don't have? And again, it's all about getting our priorities right. And you've got to elect a federal government that does that. And I think that is why people, as I've door knocked for months, feel frustrated with politics. They feel frustrated with the current Prime Minister. It's got nothing to do with his personality. It's to do with getting the country's priorities right. And the overwhelming people across this electorate have told me they don't believe the current government or Prime Minister has those priorities right. Which leads to me why I've put my hand up to try and be part of the solution in this democracy, this great democracy we have in this country. And that means putting your hand up, putting forward a plan and a vision. And for me, ladies and gentlemen, what I fear is a hung parliament. I fear that whether it's the coalition, whether it's the Labor Party, our country is at a junction, and a juncture where we need a majority government that can just govern. Because 3 years of deals, 3 years of a hung parliament on the news every night will only be torture for our country. And if you're in small business and the current cost of doing business, I fear for you. And that's why I put my hand up to be your representative, not only for this electorate, but for small business. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. And now for something completely new. A party with a name that Richard Wagner could have put into one of his operas, the Trumpet of Patriots Party. Please welcome Vicky O'Neill.
So my name is Vicky Elizabeth and I live in a small community in Dark Hollow. The reason that I'm standing here today, not having any real history in politics, is because I found out a few months ago that they put a really large wind turbine farm, so it's called, just opposite where my house is, 800 metres, to look at something the size of Centre Point Town. Now, the more that you start to understand what this so-called renewable agenda is about, the more you realise that there are layers and layers in politics and in government that we need to understand more deeply and know what's happening. We as people, not just Lutheran, but people in this country, deserve truth, we deserve disclosure, we deserve awareness of the deeper issues as they occur. So the renewables is what stimulated myself to stand here. I'm highly nervous. I don't really know what you expect. I've never done this, but I am prepared to stand here and stand up for something. Now, the reason to join what was called the United Australian Party, a much different name in my opinion than Trumpet of Patriots, and there's a history around that. But the reason to stand under that party is because a lot of the policies that they hold were in alignment with my values. Not all, and that's because not everything is perfect. But I can stand with enough of those policies, hopefully I won't with the same name, but I can stand with enough of them to be under that banner. And I appreciate what that party is doing across the country by mobilising ordinary, everyday people who are not politicians and don't know what the campaign is about and don't know how to do all of these things that all of these wonderful people do know, but have something in their heart that is calling them to stand up for a better Australia, for a better country, and for a change in governance. I didn't say government, I said governance. And governance means that we listen deeply, we listen to each other deeply, and we hear inside what our greater truths are as people, because we all matter. Your lives matter incredibly. Your businesses matter, but your life matters. And if something is impinging on your life, whether that is a large wind turbine farm outside of your door, whether that is a road that is not sustaining the life force of movement that requires the movement of produce out of country into city, whatever that is, whether that's a rail network that connects, whatever way that that is impinging on your life, health, all sorts of things, you, every person in this country, deserves to have something that means they are looked after inside, and that something comes with you. So I'm here because I believe in this. I also just want to thank everyone, and I want to thank the other three MPs. I watch what you do. I've heard them a really long time, and I just honour the way that you conduct yourselves and make it all this so close. And I just thank you because you're listening. And I don't have that luxury necessarily. I found out 2 weeks ago that I'm here. So you don't know me and I don't know you, but I hope in this little opening you've heard something of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Okay, to business. A lot of questions here, and they are, as predicted, pursuing fairly predictable themes. There's questions about what's holding back population growth in Calare and can it be remedied? There's questions about renewables and so forth, which we'll get to later, but top of the list, and we'll start off with our sitting member to reply first to this. This hub, this university hub where we are tonight, recently hosted courses for business to navigate transition to the post-coal economy. What is your policy regarding the economic transition of Lithgow? Andrew G.
Thank you. You've got a question. I have a question.
No, it's in fact, we're not actually showing
You don't have, no, I just like a single question.
What is your policy regarding transition of Lithgow's economy?
Yeah, look, I think that Lithgow has extraordinary natural advantages, and I think that Lithgow needs to take full advantage of what it has. It's on the electric train line, which is a great advantage. It's the closest community in the Central West to Sydney. It's got a highly skilled workforce in terms of its manufacturing base. So you've got Thales, which makes arms for the Australian Defence Force. You've got food processing, for example, Ferrero, and you've also got mining industries. And that is a highly skilled work base just with those industries alone. And so I think that Lithgow has to play to its strengths. I know that some people don't like to say that it's the gateway to the Central West, but it is the gateway to the Central West. It's the first port of call when people come through. And I think there are great opportunities for Lithgow, especially with the airport, which is being built just over the hill. So I think that I'm very supportive of the council's economic plan. I think that is very important. And when I've worked with other communities in attracting new businesses to areas, for example, Mudgee, they had because of the mining activity over there a few years ago, they had a day where they got business people, including residential property developers, to come out to Mudgee, and they gave a presentation on what Mudgee can do. And during that presentation, they said, if you come out here and put a development application, we'll give you an answer in 30 days. And so I think you've got to actually make sure that you have the right foundations for businesses to operate here. And so I think that is a good model to follow. And I think that you need to work out in Lithgow what is the strengths, and freight and logistics would be a good one with the airport just over the hill. So I think concentrate on the strengths and also make sure that local businesses have the basics that they need to thrive. And as I've said, I've started my own small business with my brothers. It was one of the first things that I did when I got out of university. I know how hard it is to start a small business. So you've got to make sure that the fundamentals are in place to get businesses here. And I think that there is a strong case for decentralisation incentives to get businesses to move to Lithgow and indeed other areas in the country. And those incentives can relate to setup costs, fit out costs, and also upskilling and technology costs. And I think we've just opened the skills hub just a couple of months ago. And I think training our young people to make sure they're fit for the future. And at the moment, our young students are learning about drones. I think that is really important, and getting those skills in so that people are able to transfer their employment if they need to. Thank you.
Yeah, that's 3 minutes, by the way. 3 minutes, just to remind you all. Yes, otherwise you'll get chimed by Tinkerbell. Okay, let's now hear from Kate Cook. Kate, your policy regarding transition of Lithgow's economy.
Thank you, Steve. What a great question. And again, how appropriate that we're here. I had the pleasure recently of having a briefing about Lithgow's evolving economic plan, otherwise known as LEAP. And it is extraordinary the amount of work that has been done there. And I know some people in this room have had something to do with that as well. The long and short of it is there's so much diligence, there's so much work that's being done. There's $100 million already allocated to start some of that work, and yet there's been no support where it needs to come from at the federal level or state level to get that work underway. And the most important message that I was given a briefing the other day is if that work doesn't start now, it won't take $100 million to achieve that. It will take up to $400 million. That you can go online and have a look at the LEAP report. It's really long and detailed, but that's the crux of it. We need to act now. Interestingly, I've spoken to a lot of people, I mean, moving beyond Cole's question, and your question you mentioned to see the other day was about moving beyond Cole. So interestingly, when I've spoken to, for example, someone in Portland who's worked in the coal mines for 40 years, a 23-year-old who drives coal trucks, and the head of the union, the vice president of the union of mining and energy workers here in this area, all of them said the same thing. We know that this industry will come to an end, not tomorrow, not next week, but in the near future. So we know that there needs to be a plan. So there's no argument about whether or not the industry continues. The argument is how do we look after the people and the families that have contributed to this local economy of those industries to make sure that they continue. And what I don't want to see happen is to Lithgow is what happened in the Lithgow Valley, where workers at the coal-fired power station given 6 months notice that are about to lose their jobs. Not enough time to put plans in place. Conversely, around the world and even in other places in Australia, what I've seen is a really sensible, measured plan that the whole community can get involved, but the workers are able to come and look at what are the other jobs that they can transition to, not just from coal jobs to renewable energy jobs, but what are the whole range of new industries and new jobs that can come from having an abundance of clean energy. So I think that's what we need to really focus on. I'm really keen to work with young people. I've spoken to some of the principals here at some of the schools about young people. I had a great conversation with the head of the Australian Electrical Trades Union recently, who pointed out to me that he wants to send a message to everyone about the huge opportunity for jobs as electricians. We need to triple the amount of electricity that we're currently making today to achieve the transition. And so he is on a mission, and I talked to him about Lithgow. He's really keen to find the jobs for in Lithgow. That is part of my plan. Thank you.
Yeah, power gen, it comes up a lot. There's a number of people who've included in their questions reference to the price of electricity, as well as power gen being what Lithgow exports for a living. We have this question, 85% of businesses, according to a national survey recently, say that the cost of living crisis impacts business because consumers are hard pressed. The question is, what do you see as one way the pressure can be eased? I do think I've jumped press, haven't I? Yes. My apology. Do you mind if we go back to the previous question? Your policy regarding the grants and we'll go to government. Senior citizen.
Sorry, I should have gone into. That's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, I'm a supporter of the locomotive workshop. How we structure it, we need state government involved in that a bit. I'm a big supporter. I've spoken to Michelle Leibot several times. I just think the structure is going to be important to get it right because it's a big commercial parcel of land in Lithgow that has huge potential. As the former regional roads minister, yes, under Labor we now have a road to nowhere, but we have a road. We have something and a preserved corridor to resume that project under a coalition government. It's going to be huge for Lithgow because it will take 5 years to do the highway duplication, and then when you get to the tunnel, it will be another 10 years worth of work. It's boomtown for Lithgow once we get there. As the former regional roads minister, part of the criteria in the tenders were they to set up their base in Lithgow. The labour was to come from Lithgow, their operations were to be based in Lithgow, and it was all about upskilling the next generation workforce out of Lithgow. The question, certificate talks about energy. The coalition have put an energy plan in the paper. It was released last September. It's not going to suit everyone, but it is a plan that will underpin Lithgow's future. Lithgow is a proud coal mining town that has transitioned to be a proud coal-fired power generation town. What is the next frontier? It has to be energy. In this country, we are not competitive with our wages, with our standard of living. That's fine, I support that. But how do we become competitive as a state, well, as a region, as a state, and as a country? It's through energy. And Lithgow can be the engine room of regional New South Wales again, if it chooses to be at the election. This is where the jobs are. This is where the advanced manufacturing will come. Because part of our plan is the first rollout of the first 2 nuclear power plants will include precincts that are attached to them. that will include hooking energy straight from the grid available for industrial purposes. And so what I'm talking about is making, building, doing things again, because that's what Lithgow is good at. Lithgow is good at being a country that actually does things, a community of doers. But long term, if everyone's competing to be a tourism destination, it's not going to work. Lithgow has some fantastic tourism destinations here, but it needs a real industry that has real jobs that is associated with it that will underpin your future, not for 3 years, but for 50, 60, 70 years. That's why we've put an energy plan on the table, and every candidate should be real upfront about this and not be a fence sitter. That's our plan. It includes Lithgow, and it includes this town and this region having real jobs, real opportunity, and real investment for the future that no other neighbouring town will have.
This time I won't go off piece. I'll stick with the script. The question still is, what's your policy regarding transition of the first column? Vicky.
So I'm new to this whole thing, so you just have to be very patient with me. And I've heard what everyone else has said. What I understand when you phone, when you walk the streets, when you walk on the land, when you walk on country, when you remember this place, what you feel is hardworking, real human beings who've done a lot of work to bring life into this place. So what we've got to live though alone is the memory of how to work hard, how to make industry work, and how to sustain lives through many different variables. So this has got a history that we can continue with. Some of the strategies that the other candidates are speaking about seem to match what the Patriot stands for with nuclear, to move away from the renewable agenda and to look at how energy can be generated during this was in a place such as the connectivity to Sydney. I drive over there often across the mountains, and this is the first town that I've come to that has been, I've come to shops and I've come to cafes and I've come to places, and to go as a hub of businesses when you arrive here with the vibrance of their way of living, because it's value to community, and it's value to people's business. The other thing that I believe will be so important is education and supporting the young people that are in university here, supporting the ideas that any community needs to relate into the future. So I would say that any child who's educated, who understands through thinking, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, is a child of the future and has the ideas that your community for Lithgow to grow forward. So whilst we have candidates' ideas, we need future thought. We need all of that coming through and support our young people, young ideas. So I hope that's of some use to this little panel this evening. Thank you.
Yes, and speaking of education, one of our principal educators, the principal of Lithgow High School, is with us in the audience this evening. Hello. And he's not the only one asking questions about education. In order to be succinct and to the point, I'll just ask for your ideas regarding developing a skilled workforce in our district. And let's start off this time with Kate Hawke. No, 3 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes. Thank you. And from an educational point of view, I think we have to look at the whole lifetime of education. So my policies start with really strong early childcare and early education. And we see that as not just a babysitting service, but as something that really that adds to a lot of productivity, that enables families to get back into the workforce. And that is really crucial for a child's development. So a child, the experts tell us that if a child accesses really good early education, it sets them up for a lifetime of education. We need fully funded public schools, 100% to the SRS, which is just the bare minimum. We probably need to do better than that. And then at a tertiary level, we need to be supporting students and supporting families, so that the university education and everything that goes along with it, from placements that people have to do, is something that they can afford to do. In terms of work skills, again, I think my way of doing politics and my process is to work with the community. So in the years between this election and the last election, and I also ran as independent, that's been my job. I've been working with communities that are facing, similar to Lithgow, some kind of transformation, and that need to talk about what do we want our communities to look like in 10, 20, 40 years. And so we need to look at what are the industries that are going to be creating the jobs. And for example, with a community that I worked with in Hay in southwest New South Wales, a very much an agricultural community, they then saw the potential of new industries coming into town, and in that case it was renewable energy projects that were coming in. And I worked with that community to work out how the young people could be part of that. And so as a result of that process, the TAFE there has now become a centre of excellence for training in those new jobs. But we need to get beyond thinking that, the skills transformation is told to renewable energy. There's a whole range of new industries. And one of the most exciting ones for me is that locomotive workshop. Bringing that back online, that is hundreds and hundreds of jobs. And it's just such a shame that that facility has been sitting there underutilised for years and years. And then the other exciting outcome from that is the potential of transforming diesel trains to battery-powered electric trains. That is happening right here in Lithgow already. Some of you might know Tim Elderton. Tim Elderton is doing that work. I think currently employing 47 or 50 people. It could be hundreds of people. And that could also enable much cheaper public transport if trains are running on battery power, which is powered by solar, rather than on diesel. Huge opportunity there, and lots of skills that can be developed, lots of apprenticeships. Thanks very much.
3 minutes on education from Senator Harrow.
Yep.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Kate raised a very good point about childcare, and I'll just quickly touch on it because I actually agree with Kate on this, so we'll run with this. It is actually really important, and it is something that is at a critical point throughout Calare, and probably, I suspect, if you travel the country as well. And that is not only about the benefits and outcomes for the child in early learning, but in participation, getting more parents back into the workforce, in particular female participation. It's really important in an economy starving for productivity. It's really one of the only ways we can lift productivity. But around education and skills, governments are good at throwing money at problems, okay? They're good at throwing money at problems, and at times there isn't the outcomes to justify it. And I think education in that space is a really important area, that it needs heavy investment from any state or federal government, but you've got to have the right settings and the right policy framework to get outcomes at the end. To the principle here, what I would say to Lithgow is you need a policy framework that is driven from Canberra around what sort of jobs are going to be in this region for the future, and to tailor packages that are going to meet the demand. We're talking about traineeships, we're talking about apprenticeships, we're talking about the great work in a university building and country university centres that have been set up across regional New South Wales and Australia that are delivering fantastic outcomes. The reality is, long term, we need to make sure that investment is targeted with real outcomes and what actual services and support schools really need. Because what happens, obviously, lots of GST collected, it's carved up by and sent to the states, but I've just heard countless stories, in particular in education, where they're unable to access those additional supports, or where there have been funding cuts from the current state government, New South Wales government. They are real, they are live. People are talking certainly to me about those, but longer term, we need to make sure that we have a better model around aligning the skills that are needed to the regions and to the projects of the future. And as I've already discussed, whether that's the Great Western Highway upgrade, whether that is a nuclear pathway that will have hundreds of jobs, I'm not a big fan of promoting a skills hub for renewables, because what happens with renewables is everyone comes in, they build the turbines, they're out of tanners, they leave, there's nothing, there's 30 odd jobs in operation. What Lithgow needs is operational jobs, good paying jobs, but it needs the skills to make sure that Lithgow's own next generation have the supports they can stay in this community, live in this community, and earn a good wage and raise a family in this community.
Video lead, what thoughts on education?
So with education, one of the core things that I understand is we need to really be with our children. So whilst childcare is important, parents are more important. And if we can find a way that parents can be with their children more, we have more understanding within that family unit. We have less chance of disassociation for children, of social issues, and emotional intelligence would be better if the children can be with their parents. So to find a way where education can support families and give that time to parents so that they can be at home to play with the children, so that mothers or fathers or partners can be with families. I've worked a long time with children, that's my primary work, and I know that any family that has children at their heart and any education system that actually has children at their heart is the way that we should move forward, not just on a community level, but as a government, as a country. So within this community, what I would say is, can we find a way together to support our education of children and to create diversity in education? Education doesn't have to be in a public or a private school. Education can be from school. Education can be in different models that work for community. So to think a bit outside of those structures and to give the flexibility is a way that this community may come forward in the education model. So Lithgow, hard working maybe, but also forward thinking and forward planning, and to have that ability to give families and children the best opportunity in life. I know one of the policies in the Patriot system we refer to gender, and part of that is so that we're not pressing on our young people ideas that are not necessary at very young ages. It's not a discrimination, it's just let's not create those impressions in young, susceptible minds and allow them to develop as humans, beautiful humans, from birth through preschool, through into the high school. So that's my answer to the question.
And to close out a conversation on education and review.
Thank you. Well, firstly, congratulations to all the work, you're doing at high school. You've done a superb job, and I see it all the time. And it's a wonderful thing you do at the school. So congratulations to that.
Could you stop the camera?
Oh, okay. Camera's here. I realise that. Look, I think that schools and education obviously has a crucially important role to play, particularly in skills training. But we ask our schools now to do so much. Think about it. Back years ago, it was just the 3 R's, you go in, do your study and you're out. But these days, schools are much more than that. They are running mentoring programs. They're running all sorts of different levels of education and STEM training. Some have what is referred to as the gifted and talented streams. Some schools are running all sorts of innovative programs, but we're asking the schools to do a lot more. And the funding model, though, hasn't really changed that much. And so I think we need greater flexibility in terms of giving our schools in particular, the flexibility to tackle that task of skills training. And not only do you have to give the schools, the flexibility, but you also have to give them the funding to do it as well. So you've got to rethink and reimagine what our schools can do and how they operate. And you've got to actually give principals like Foddy the ability to make decisions and work with the community and tailor programs as to what skills are going to be needed in the future. A great project is the Skills Hub, which we recently opened, which was an $800,000 investment. And the kids from the local schools are learning how to make drones, which is really great. But what happens when the money runs out? So what's beyond those programs? So you need an ongoing stream of funding, and you need to give schools also the funding and the flexibility to implement an effective plan. You also need to involve employers quite heavily, because they are the ones who are going to tell you what skills are needed locally. And so they need to be integral to all of this. And so governments need to be giving local businesses incentives to actually undertake that task as well and work with local students to get them into the workforce. So it's got to be a partnership. There's got to be flexibility, there's got to be funding, and there's got to be that real collaboration. And we've seen it with the Skills Hub, so it can be done, but you just got to keep taking that to the next level. And there are ways that we can do that, but it can't be brought in from Macquarie Street, and it can't be brought in from the top down from Canberra. It's got to come locally, and you've got to give our local organisations the funding and the flexibility to get the results that are needed locally, because at the end of the day, local people know what is best for the local area.
We'll go slightly change of pace here. Not entirely certain the candidates are actually going to want to answer this question, but it has been asked, so I got to ask the question. Where do you stand on your preferences? Is that something you're willing to talk about? Okay, let's start with St. Aaron. Where would your preferences go and why?
Well, thank you for the question. I've published my how to vote on Facebook this afternoon, so it's there for everyone to see. There's 10 candidates. I jag number 10, so I'm at the bottom. But ladies and gentlemen, everyone should be clear as to whether they're going to suggest preferences because or not. That is each candidate's decision. The National Party has chosen to number all the way down to 10. We've decided, based on principle, that the Greens are last, legalised cannabis, and the Labor Party towards the bottom. And from there, people can see that how to vote and digest that themselves. But the reality is that for minor parties and for others, it is important that voters know what that candidate suggests in their preference flow, if they're going to have a preference flow. I think it's a bit of a cop-out considering if any candidate says, oh, I haven't decided yet, like pre-polling opens on Tuesday. We know who the candidates are, there's 10 in the field. The reality will be is this seat will be determined by a preference flow. In my view, none, either 10 of us, even the incumbent, none of us can win on the primary vote, in my view. So preferences will determine the result for Calare, and the preferences are there for people to see. But it is also worth noting that the ballot paper is your ballot paper. You can preference, no matter what I put on my how to vote or what any other candidate says, they're your preferences. So what I say to ladies and gentlemen is I'm here seeking to be your next federal member. I'm asking for your vote. So I would ask that you put me number 1, and then from there you will have a how to vote with a suggested preference flow. Otherwise, preference however you want.
Yes, there is going to be a fairly crowded area for contestants. 10 candidates this time around. Who knows? There's only got 6. So there you go. Vicky, where will your preferences go?
Given the nature of the party that I'm standing with, it's not a question I can answer. I know that the preferences will be placed onto no vote cards and will be given them as they have received that. So it's not something I might be able to speak about. I did like the way Sarah answered that question, though, and I do personally believe that we have our own understanding of how to vote if we follow the lead of our innate wisdom. But I think those outcomes are very important to realise that preferences make a difference in this country, and especially in this country.
If you're planning on voting for an independent, preferences might be significant. We have two candidates, both of them independent. First of all, let's hear from Andrew G.
Yeah, well, we've started to distribute our how to vote material, and I'm obviously asking people to put a number 1 in my box. I'm number 7 on the ticket, so I'm hoping that it's lucky 7, Ronaldo number 7, Beckham number 7. So I'm asking people obviously to put a 1 in that box. I am distributing down to 10 on my how to vote, but as we've heard, it's only a guide. So for my number 2, despite her seeming to have an issue with me wearing a hat, hey, we've got number 2. Sam, you are number 4, and Julie is number 6, and we'll go through the rest of the list in due course. But that's the basic outline. Okay.
Hey, minus hat.
Thank you. And I think we're around this one. Section the rest of this. What I know is that both is what Sam said. Your preferences are your own. So there's no such thing as somebody giving another candidate your preferences. So what I'm saying to you is put page number 1. We are saying Andrew, put Andrew number 2, but then I'm asking people to make up their own. So I'm not numbering all the way down to 10. As I said at the beginning, I'm an independent, so I'm not part of the political party. I need to act in what is the best interests of Clare, and I am asking people to vote number 1 for me, and then make up their own minds. And Andrew is 2, so I'm not aligning with any political party. I think Clare is a much more powerful position, especially in a hung parliament, as you like to call it, or a minority government. I prefer rural and collaborative government, collaborative parliament. It's where you get the robust discussion, and that's where you get a more powerful Clare. I think better for Clare to remain.
Okay, back to business. And we've done everybody over years. Back to business. Taxation, possibly one of the most controversial policy areas there is. Most businesses here will tell you they pay too much of it. What's your opinion on the taxation policy of the existing government? What would your policy recommendation be? Vicky,
And now taxation. Well, no one wants it. And the level of taxation is always going to increase under different levels of government who need more taxpayers' money to go into the layers and layers of infrastructure that they have in this country, not all of which goes towards them. So if we approached taxation from the view of where does taxpayers' money go, and how many billions and billions of dollars are going to places which perhaps it shouldn't, then that disclosure and that open transparency may in fact find a way for us to see that taxation does not have to continually increase. And this is not about this regional electorate, this is national. So if we say that Trump electorates has some affiliation with Trump, no intended in that respect, but Doge, looking at where money is being spent in a government and making sure that that is seen, heard, and felt as a truth, would be part of what this fund stands for, so that you know where your tax money goes to. So I probably haven't answered it in the way that another candidate would answer this, but regardless, where does the tax money go to? Where does my money go to? And it's always going to increase, but until we know where it turns up, can we then say that it can be redistributed and reallocated into humanitarian avenues, which means looking after us, looking after our lives, looking after our interests, looking after our livelihoods and our communities. That to me would be the best way to approach this issue, is to look at how we can bring it back to us. Thank you.
Income tax and business tax are already issues that are in play in this current election between the government and the opposition. Your views on taxation policy, Andrew G?
Yeah, it's an important issue for our country, especially in a cost of living crisis. It's vitally important that we look seriously at the whole tax system. And one of my concerns that I have at the moment is that the major parties seem to have a pretty short-term view about tax reform, and it's about one-off sugar hits as we head into the election. So, for example, let us freeze the beer excise, okay? So we'll freeze it for 2 years. And that gives you a sugar hit before an election, but it's not long-term reform. We should be looking at how we structure all of those taxes. If you look at the coalition proposal to cut the petrol excise for a year, what happens after 1 year? It's just going to go back up again. And so I think we need to sort of have a holistic look at what we're doing with our tax system to bring in some lasting reform and not just focus on the short-term sugar hits. So yes, we do need to be striving and bringing income tax down, but how do you do that within the overall tax mix? And that's a conversation you've got to have. Look at the corporate tax rates. They're still very high. What are they, 25 and 30%? So what are we actually doing about that to ease the burden on our small businesses? And I think one thing that we could be doing for new small businesses is actually bringing in a system where small businesses in their first year get a company tax concession so that they're not paying as much tax, and they get a tax break in that first year of operation. And that would actually help more business people set up and employ people and be the engine room of the economy that we know that they can be. But I think it's a really important, an important area for the country, but we're not really having those big picture debates about long-term tax reform. It's okay, you know, you saw in the budget, there was, you know, the very modest income tax cut that people got, and look, I voted for it. So, you know, we're not going to knock back tax breaks, but where's the long-term structural reform that I think is needed? And I also think that business people actually want to see, they want some certainty that there is an overall plan and that we're not just going from sugar hit to sugar hit, that we're actually steering by the stars and not by the lights of each passing ship. And I think people want to see that long-term taxation plan. And one of the things that we haven't got at the moment is that longer-term view of how it all fits together, how we can deliver lasting tax reform and lasting income tax breaks and cuts, and also helping our small business people as well. Let's have that conversation rather than just the short-term sugar hits, which are all well and good, but, you know, freezing the beer tax just locks in sky-high student prices. It's not lasting reform. Thank you.
One of the questions that I often get asked is, wouldn't it be easy to the Department of Party instead of being an independent? And the tax question is a really good example of why my answer is no. I could never run the party, because the major parties have been too fearful to go for bold, courageous tax reform for as long as I can remember. We had the Henry tax review, what was it, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, brilliant recommendations that it's that they never passed, because the political parties get straight into their three-year term thinking, they're halfway through the term, they're already thinking about getting elected again. So too gutless, let's use that word, too gutless to look at the things that may or may not be talked about coming up to election. Whereas the things we've talked about that we need going forward, whether it's childcare, aged care, housing, education properly funded, the building resilience to climate impacts, helping coal workers transition to new jobs, all of those things are going to require government funding. So we need to look at the entire spectrum of tax, and particularly at the top end, we have gas companies, multinational gas companies that are exporting Australian gas and paying zero tax or very little tax. And then we have workers, we have nurses and teachers who are paying equivalent tax. It's just not even. And then we have in the middle of the range, and we talk about what's causing our housing prices, with housing prices to soar. The thing that the political parties, again, choose people to go in is to have a good, honest look at what in our tax system has caused that increase in prices. And I'm not talking about, and when we talk about capital gains tax and negative gearing, there is a clear point in time when those things kicked in, and then house prices became so much more escalated so much more than the escalation in wages. So it made it harder and harder to afford a house and the wage you had. So I'm not talking about canning those things every time that gets brought up. People say, oh, but you're going to knock taxation on the head. No. All I'm saying is that for the sake of nurses and teachers, aged care workers, childcare workers, maybe you're going to be okay having those tax breaks on an investment property or two, perhaps, an extra bit of income. But if you've got 25 or 26, something to do that, 26 investment properties, it's probably going to be okay without having more capital gains and negative gearing. Capital gains is negative gearing. So I think it's just a bit of honesty and, a bit of courage is all we need for the whole tax. Thanks.
Very good question. It's a very good question. Firstly, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, if you're in the coalition, in opposition, or the Labor Party in government, you have to come up with real policies. Both sides have got policies out there. That's the thing. When you're in a major party, you actually have the opportunity to form government or not. So you've got to have real policies. That's why two major parties are out there with actual policies. Obviously, the fuel is an important one as a cost of living measure to actually support people, in particular in the regions, as quickly as possible. Halving the fuel tax at the Bowser straight away actually will have a huge impact in the household budget for people that live on this side of the Blue Mountains, who have to use their car every day. But if we're going to talk about tax more broadly, obviously for small businesses, and it's a small business forum, the instant asset write-off that was brought in by the coalition has been a really important initiative for small business. And it was the opposition, the coalition, that advocated for that in this election campaign that the now government, Labor government, have honoured. Now that's a good thing, but more broadly, when our economy does improve, if I was your local member, I would be pushing that we look to actually up that instant asset write-off. Because when we brought it in years ago, 20 grand got you a Toyota Hilux for $19.99. But everything costs a lot more now. And if you're in the ag sector, you can't buy anything for under 40 grand. These are small businesses, these are tradies, these are plumbers, these are carpenters that are actually buying these new bits of equipment that stimulates local businesses. To the broader point about tax reform, I've paid personal income tax. When I had a business, I paid plenty of payroll tax. I paid company tax. Any tax that was there, you pay it, because everyone wants a business that does well. And if your business does well, you contribute back to the economy. What we should be having the conversation about, and it doesn't matter who's on government benches in the next few years, whoever's sitting on government benches will have to have the conversation about tax reform. The only way our economy is going to prosper is that if we remove inefficient taxes, we look at the taxes that actually do work, whether they're consumption taxes or, Kate rates negative gearing. It's all well and good to have a crack at people that negatively gear, but the overwhelming majority of people in this country who negatively gear properties are mum and dad with one property. The overwhelming majority of people have one property, and it is their super in a lot of cases and an investment. The conversation will have to be had, because if we are going to lift standards in education, if we are going to help incentivise more GPs into the system, put more resources into our hospitals, actually repair and fix the potholes in our roads, if we're going to actually get back to basics and fix the things that impact people's lives every day, we're going to have to have a tax conversation, and it won't matter who's on government benches, but it is a grown-up conversation our country's going to have sooner rather than later.
Right, well, with less than half an hour to go, we now have to come to the alleged elephant in the alleged room. And there have been an awful lot of questions about renewables, power generation, and candidates are being asked where do they stand on pumped hydro for Lake Lyell, wind farms in our district, and the nuclear power proposal from the Coalition for Mount Piper. Let's begin with the city member, Andrew G.
Yeah, well, let's start with the pumped hydro. I've been to the presentations on the pumped hydro, and I think there are some concerns around it. I think that there are some businesses which are seriously affected by it, and there are also some environmental concerns. So in its current form, I wouldn't be prepared to support that. In terms of renewables, I think we need a sensible and balanced and workable energy plan. And it's got to be fair to everyone. So it's got to be a balance. It's a balancing act, like many things in life. And I think, as we've heard, when I was listening to Vicky, who's going to have possibly a turbine 800 metres from her house, I don't think that's a fair outcome. And that's the problem with the way that the rollout has occurred at the moment. It was the coalition that allowed wind farms into state forests. The New South Wales Nationals and Liberals voted it into the state forests, and there is not enough regulation around it to actually make sure that there is fairness and protection for neighbouring landholders. And I think that is a glaring omission. So I have put a bill into Parliament that would actually do something about it, which is the banning of wind farms in state forests, and it would actually stop that, because I don't think that the consultation that has occurred with Samiva so far has been genuine, and I don't think it's good enough. We've got residents who are going to have these turbines hundreds of metres high, 700 metres away from their house. I mean, it's just not right. And so I think you need that balance and that workability, and it's got to be a sensible energy mix. In terms of the nuclear question, I think the issue here is that whilst we've had a broad policy announcement, there has been no detail about what this plan is all about. And I think that the people of the Lithgow communities need to be given the respect of actually someone from the coalition who's putting forward this policy to come out and actually tell people what is in the policy. Because I went to the Shadow Energy Minister, Ted O'Brien, and I said, Ted, we've got all these questions. For example, where are you going to store the waste? And he said, oh, well, it'll be stored in Lithgow. And then he started talking about storing it in a Coke can. So I'm not against nuclear energy. I've had the benefit of nuclear medical scans, and I've had, and I've supported the AUKUS submarines. But I think if you are going to announce a policy this big, I think you need to give the people the respect of actually coming in and telling people what is in the plan. I was speaking to Paul Toole about this recently, and I said, Paul, what do you make of it? And he said, is it fact or is it fiction? Because there are so few details on it. And the details just keep going. People are interested in the jobs on the nuclear reactor, but when are the jobs going to come? When's it going to be built? What's going to happen to, we're going to end it there? Or?
No, I think you should probably keep going for at least about a minute.
Yeah.
This is worth exploring further.
Yeah. So you've got issues such as when will this thing be built? And what will be built there? Where's the water going to come from? What the environmental impacts will be? Where's the waste going to be stored? Issues of security. All of these questions have not been answered. What we've had so far is people coming to Lithgow and say, we're for nuclear energy, which is fine per se, but where is the detail about the plan so that people can make an informed decision? And as I've gone around the region and people have said, oh, what do you think about it? I said, well, if this was going to be set up next to your house, like a wind turbine or something, you would want and expect those details. And we haven't had the details of the plan. And I think that that really is an omission. And as Paul Toole has said, at the moment, we have more questions than answers. For example, here's another one. What happens when Energy Australia finally closes Mount Piper? They said they're going to do it in 2040. The coalition has said that if these companies are not willing to build nuclear reactors, then they will nationalise them. They will nationalise these companies and the sites. So is Energy Australia and the Mount Piper site going to be nationalised? That's just another question. What sort of jobs will there be? I mean, the reality is, folks, you know, if Mount Piper's closing in 2040 and they start building it, it will take at least 15 years. So you're looking at like 30 years, you're looking at 10 election cycles. And I think if you are going to put a plan, and there are 7 sites around Australia, but no one has actually come to Lithgow and said, this is exactly what we are proposing to build. This is how it will work. This is how much waste will be there. And the Shadow Energy Minister told me that the waste is going to be stored for 100 years in Lithgow, but no one's actually come to Lithgow and said, this is the plan, we're going to store waste here, because there's no nuclear waste dump in Australia on the horizon. So these are all issues that need to be discussed. And if it's the coalition's policy, then I really think that someone from the coalition needs to come in and not just have a broad level, you know, we are in favour of nuclear, but they actually need to come in and give the policy details. As I've said, you know, having had the benefit of nuclear medical scans, I'm not against nuclear power. I think it has technological benefit, and they're going to power those nuclear submarines, which I support. However, it is very concerning that those details have not been provided locally. And I think, as I've done consultations around the Lithgow area, people are absolutely crying out for those details. And I've held public meetings all around this area, and that is something that has really come through. So that's my take.
Thank you very much. Look, it is one of the biggest, certainly speaking as a news guy, it's one of the biggest issues in the general area. And I think 3 minutes is probably not enough, as Andrew's just demonstrated. Let's extend that. How long did Andrew speak for? 6 minutes for the remaining 3 minutes. If you want to take 6 minutes, then we do have time. Okay, would you like to?
But it's going to work, it's going to be 6 minutes. This is going to be the most consequential decision that we make for this election. Who doesn't say we want to make this election a referendum on energy experts? It is so crucial that people have the right information. And if I wanted to get the right information about nuclear energy, I wouldn't be asking terrifying against the coalition to come here and tell us. Because the policy that they put forward has no basis in reality in terms of the problems that we are trying to solve. So what do we need right now? We need cheap, reliable, affordable electricity now. We need it now. And why? There's a few reasons. One is that the way we currently produce electricity is we have 60% of electricity coming from coal-fired power stations, the other 40% coming from renewables. Those coal-fired power stations are reaching the end of their use cycle. There has not been a single day in the last year that there hasn't been a coal-fired power station out of action. A rising coal-fired power station, as an example, costs the taxpayer $225 million each and every year just to keep going. So we need to replace those no matter what. And the question is, what do we replace those with? Do we replace it with new coal generators? Do we replace it with nuclear? Or do we keep going on the renewables trajectory, which we're 47% of the way there already, and continue on from there? The other problem that we're trying to solve is the ongoing problem of climate change, which has hit this region so hard. You look at the floods in Newcastle, the fires here, and the ongoing droughts. I live in Orange, which was 6 months away from zero water at the end of the last round. 6 months away. And there was no plan for a town of 40,000 people. I spoke to the water person on council and said, what is the plan? And 40,000 people turn their taps and no water comes. He said, there's no plan because we didn't ever think we'd get in this position because the climate modelling is just out the window, it's changed so much. So that is the other issue that we're trying to deal with. We can't, that is an element in the room for many people that we can't ignore, but it's been ignored for too long. So for decades, the coalition government in particular, but I would say the Labor government as well, has had their head in the sand on this issue, on the fact that we have to replace that coal-fired power station. on the fact that we have to deal with the ongoing climate problem. The coalition plan for nuclear power that the National Party is putting forward is not going to work on so many levels. We had an event in Orange on Friday night, and I encourage you to look at my website and have a look at the recording of that. And we had one of Australia's leading thinkers and academics on energy in general coming to speak about that. And he is actually quite positive about nuclear as a technology. But he just made it really simple. Too expensive, takes too long, and we need it now. And we actually won't need it. Because on the renewables trajectory that we're on now, we would hit 82% renewable energy by 2030 on this trajectory, and it's going to need to be able to continue at the pace at that. We can't afford to be in moratoriums on any of our energy sources. And if we continue in that way, then we have, by the time, you know, the coalition thinks they're going to flip the switch on nuclear in 2040, we don't need it. We're already there. He did make a point that there is room possibly for nuclear technology in the form of small modular reactors, just that last few percent. That's a decision to make in 2040. What we need to realise too is that nuclear energy is going to take so much more water than coal has taken, and that renewable energy takes. And as I just said, we are a water strength region. Water security is one of the biggest things I hear from people around. Can you imagine what it would do to a town's economy if water had to be brought in? So at that point when Orange was 6 months away from zero water, Bathurst Council was even close, and they were getting quotes at $1 million a week to bring in water, so that people would just have water available to them. $1 million a week, and they didn't know if it was going to be 4 weeks or 52 weeks. So the economic impact is just huge. And coming back to the economics of it. So the first person that I rang when I heard kindergarten particular policy was someone I know who's works in one of the biggest investment banks in the world, in a global world. And he said to me, even if, so we all know that nuclear energy is illegal in every state of Australia. So even if those laws were miraculously dropped, you know, in the short term, actually that is a massive development that has to be undertaken as well, which again makes the whole process longer. But even if we didn't have those laws, there is not an international investor in the world that would invest in nuclear energy for Australia. Why? Because it would never compete on price with renewables and batteries and wind and hydro, the whole mix, and reliable transmission that can take it around the country. It would never compete on price. What I'm saying about renewable energy, and I've worked in this space, I've worked with communities, is, and I accept that not every project is right for every location. So I think that we do need communities to have a voice, and that's been my specialty area for the last few years. So it needs to be a whole of community discussion, but we need to access expert information. If you are the MP, you can pick up the phone and call the best available advice in Australia, and you should do that. That's your responsibility, and you should share that information with the people who you, for whom you're helping to make these decisions. So I just would really reiterate, this is such an important decision. I would encourage you to look at my website. There's a number of podcasts that also give much more information on this issue, but it's so important. Please think about this before you vote.
I'll try and do this quicker than 6 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. An election should be a contest of ideas, and in most parts it is, but ladies and gentlemen, all I've heard tonight is fence sitting and greenwashing. That is all I've heard so far. There's a lot of misleading information in all of that, because it's easy to say, oh, you don't have enough water. Well, why don't we actually get someone to look at that is not a politician? And that's exactly what the University of New South Wales have done. We've had 2 associate professors that are experts in this space, who have been to Mount Piper, who have been to Centennial Coal, and have both concluded that there is plenty of water to support more energy production in and around the precinct of those coal mines and the Mount Piper power station. And it's the ABC that broke this story, wasn't Sky News. This whole scaremongering around a conversation this country needs to have is disappointing. And fence sitting at the same time is just as disappointing. Now, to say that there's no overseas investors in itself is misleading, because how can an overseas investor look to invest in energy production when it's illegal? How is that possible in this country? There is a moratorium. There are prohibitions in place that it is not possible, even if an overseas investor wanted to. That's why you have to change the law. Now, we talk about renewables. There is a place for renewables. Even the Coalition's plan includes over 50% renewables for our country's energy plan. But we want more rooftop solar. We want to do sort of what the Labor government started to talk about supporting households with a battery, or looking at broader community battery schemes where every rooftop in Lithgow can have solar panels, and we feed it into large batteries so people in Lithgow can draw down. But if we want to make, build and do things in this country, we're going to need more than solar panels. And it scares me when candidates say, we are on the right trajectory, we are going to have 82% of energy derived by renewables by 2030. That's Chris Bowen's line. That is Chris Bowen's line. And what scares me for the communities, and Vicky, as someone on the front line, can appreciate this, is that 1 2 gigawatt nuclear power plant proposed to be built next door at Mount Piper is the equivalent of 1,538 of the world's largest turbines to get the same energy output. So what I say to the communities of Dark Corner, Sunny Corner, Portland, Oberon, Mount Canobolas, is that we've got over 500 proposed next door to you. Where are the other 1,000 going? A rentless renewables only plan doesn't work for Australia. It doesn't. And what I fear is Australia. Australia is going to be left behind if we don't have this conversation. Even countries like the UK, under a Labor Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has just announced the largest ever expansion of civil nuclear in UK history. That's because they've figured out that the turbines don't work. They've got the largest offshore wind project in developments. They don't work. They don't provide the energy that the UK needs to prosper. Look at a country like Germany. Moved away from nuclear, put all their eggs in the gas basket, and now they're going back to nuclear. The world will move on if we don't look at a balanced energy plan that includes renewables, but it has rooftop solar, because there's a lot of sun in this country, but we don't have as much wind as you think. But it has to include gas. It has to include a nuclear pathway. And at the same time, this is a proud coal mining town, and it shouldn't be ashamed of it. I've met with Mount Piper, I've met with Energy Australia. They're owned by China Light and Power. Like, should it have been privatised? Should it have not? That's a valid question. But the reality is China Light and Power themselves have nuclear and operate nuclear power stations. They're interested in this, of course they are, because they know that long term, Mount Piper is going to be open beyond 2040. The state Labor government has all but admitted it. They're ready to do deals with Origin. They're ready to do deals to keep the lights on in New South Wales. Mount Piper is the newest generator. Of course it can be extended. Now, our plan has been on the table since December. I do get offended that others, including the incumbent, say that no consultation has happened. I have door-knocked the overwhelming majority of the town of Lithgow, Portland, Wallerawang, and I've spoken to the overwhelming majority of small businesses in this town about our energy plan. Sorry? Well, I've been into every business. I've knocked on every door. I've left my number. And the reality is talking to people in this town about what the future looks like, because it has to be around jobs. It has to be around an energy-driven economy that can help Lithgow prosper with real jobs, good paying jobs, and what's going to underpin its economy, not only just for the next 3 years, but for decades to come.
Currently, the last speaker on renewables lives on the front line himself. Speaking earlier.
So back in full circle, the reason I'm here is because of this term for renewables. So let's just start. It's not renewable. The only thing renewable is the wind. The structure is not renewable, the steel is not renewable, the oil that drives the turbine is not renewable, the concrete that goes 8 meters into the ground is not renewable. And the structure within 20 to 30 years is not able to be recycled, so it too is not renewable. So perhaps what we need to understand is the term green energy or renewable energy is a fallacy. And once we take that out of our rhetoric, and we look at energy, perhaps then we'll find greater ways to move forward. $40 billion in subsidies towards renewables. This is not isolated to this lecture, this is around Australia. And for every country of the world that takes renewables or puts a moratorium on renewables, where's the production of those wind turbines that have been produced in China or Norway or over in other countries? Where does it turn up? It turns up in our country because we are the ones who accept that. We take it on. Why? Because there's many layers of government and there's many hidden agendas, and we know that in politics. It's the story, it's how politics is run. It's run through people getting money for different things and buying off things. So energy has to be looked at. Absolutely, we need it. I agree with Sam that decentralizing energy, creating homes that have their own source of energy is one of the simplest terms. The trumpet patriots, if I move to their policies, moves to educate us that net zero is not necessarily a pathway we should be taking, and to pull us away from the stories of needing to move towards net zero and the impact that that has on our societies. But in terms of energy, nuclear, I know that trumpet patriots stands for nuclear. I'm hearing what all of these other candidates are saying, and it's not yet stable. What does that mean? We haven't worked it out yet. It doesn't mean it's not stable as in the issues we're creating nuclear. We haven't worked it out in this country. So until we drop that term renewable, we keep accepting that green power is what's said to be, but isn't. Until we stop thinking like that, how can we turn our education, our minds, our forward thinkers to create solutions that are nuclear or that are something else indeed that we've never thought. The more that we focus on something, the less we focus on solutions that aren't it. So if we keep agreeing that renewables are the way, how can we move into something that isn't that? And renewables need their own infrastructure. They need new power lines to be built. They need new roads to be built. They're already building roads in my backyard, literally. Yet, it's not being approved. That doesn't make sense, does it? Why can I see roads being built and it hasn't been approved? So these are the layers of government that signing off on things in state forests seem to be already in agreement through SMETA and Mainstream, which is the offshore company that runs this whole project. But it's not isolated to some corners all around this electorate. They're proposed all over. If you look at how many wind turbines, they are in thousands. And if you care about Australia, have a look at what happens in offshore wind turbines and what it does to the landscape under the earth and in the oceans. It's not renewable. So let's take that away, put our minute lines, of which everyone in here has, put our education, put our children, put our thinkers onto this, stop relying on government to make up solutions when we actually can find truth. There are countries in the world that do this incredibly well, and they've worked it out. So why can't we? And I agree, it is a choice, and permanent choice, not I just built a wind tower and then I walk away. They're going to need any more employment after that. But nuclear would continue to need employment, just like the coal power station. So Energy is important. The other thing to look at is why do we need so much energy? Why do we need so much electricity? Perhaps we also need to address that as people. Where does electricity and energy go? Not there is substantive, but it's just because I need to run an air conditioner or I need to run an industry.
30 seconds.
Perhaps there's a lot of movement towards energy for running things from artificial intelligence or digital currencies or smart cities. Sorry to bring the hard topics in, but we do need to look at why we need so much electricity in this country and where it's going to go. So when I take up renewables, drop the word and regularly, maybe we'll find great solutions because we are a great country and we have great minds. Thank you.
There are so many more issues which unfortunately we cannot address this evening because we are quite frankly out of time. Housing prices, cost of living pressures, AI, which is actually a very interesting conversation in many respects, isn't it, Steve?
It's very interesting.
And many more besides. The next question of the Great Western Highway, for instance, which comes to an abrupt halt in Victoria despite our greatest expectations of it. Nevertheless, although we are out of time, many thanks to our candidates for taking time out of their busy campaign schedules to be with us tonight. And the Lithgow District Business Chamber wishes to thank the University of Western Sydney for the use of this excellent facility. And a special congratulations to the very hardworking Carol, who has helped pull all of this together, ably supported by other committee members like Dennis, like Glenda and Terry. Of course, heartfelt thanks to our audience here this evening, and of course, to everybody watching online. And just over 2 weeks to go until polling day, and we'll probably get a lot more momentum happening, many more policy announcements yet to come. And in the spirit of fair play, we wish all our candidates good luck. That's the latest. You're up to date. Thank you.